Yeah. I hope you give me enough time because cocktail is programmed for 6 o'clock.
We're aware it's
Okay.
running. I mean, there's been such great presentations with a lot of information.
Yes.
So the cocktail party will be awaiting us when you finish. So.
Fine. So you don't have to stand up at 6 o'clock. Fine. So thank you very much, Gael, for this invitation. I'm very happy and I feel honored to be here. And in this place, this is an emblematic place. It's a shame that the future politicians and decision takers who study here are not present in this room. But, well, maybe we will come across one or two outside. So, yes, from open access to open science in the Latin American ecosystem. And I do believe in an ecosystem in Latin America. And the reason, you will see why open access is not with capital letters. This is on purpose, open access and open science. How many of you understand Spanish? Well, not all. Then I will read it for you, because I think this is a marvelous sentence from Don Quixote de la Mancha. No, I will translate it. It says more or less, it's a free translation. How fortunate the age and the centuries past that were called in old times by the name of golden. And not because in that age the gold, which in our age is so esteemed, could be obtained without fatigue, but because those who lived in those times ignored these two words of yours and mine. I would say that this fragment from Don Quixote reflects very well what one could call a Latin American idiosyncrasy, or perhaps by extension an Ibero-American idiosyncrasy, something we not only inherited from the Spaniards, but that was also there before they came, but especially. It is in our tradition in Latin America to privilege the common good over the personal possessions. The private property is not a useful concept. Even if you are poor, you survive and you lead or can lead a worthy life because you pertain to a family, you are surrounded by it, and you pertain to a community where mutual support and solidarity are the glue that hold people together. And they give them a strength that we as individuals often do not have. This culture of sharing and of community rights is in stark contrast with the Anglo-Saxon culture centered around private property and individual rights. It is not surprise then that also our scientific knowledge is given away for free. We don't sell it. It does not cross our minds to make a business out of it. We do have to pay, however, for the scientific knowledge coming from other places, from other latitudes. As a consequence, we are not only out of the business circles, but we contribute to the business in other places. And to this, I must say, now speaking about the Global South, which also I think it's a sort of void concept for me, but well, we understand what you wanted to say. We must add that we have a colonial heritage, and that's something that we do share. We have not broken our ties of dependency from the North in many aspects, and one of them is precisely science and technology. We have comparatively weak science and technology systems. We have to admit it. I mean, the science and technology are also something that divides the North from the South in general. And that means we only very laterally take part in defining the relevant fields of research and the rules of the game. We make an effort sometimes to contribute, but the fact is that most often they are defined in Europe and the USA. Our strengths, however, we do have strong points. Our strength resides in our commonalities. We have, for instance, in Latin America, we have basically a common history, or a history of also of dependence, if you want, but a common history. We have a common language, which is a very important strength. And we have a disposition to cooperate and to help each other. And this is why it was possible already since the 1970s, in the era of the print on paper journals, to start building regional databases, free, of course, for free. We would share information. It was not easy to share the journals because it cost a lot to print them and also to send them by post. But at least we could share information on the journals. And there were in Clase and Periodica together these first two databases of the order of 2,400 journal titles for all of Latin America. And when we became aware of the almost absolute lack of visibility and of presence of our journals in the early 1990s, we decided to set up Latindex as a regional information center in order to make these journals visible, in order to tell the rest of the world and also to tell ourselves that we had all these journals and to promote their use. It has not been an easy task, but why have we managed to go ahead? Because we worked all countries together, and the most important journal information system has now all countries. Cielo has about a dozen, all countries of the region, and also Spain and Portugal. So it's 100% coverage in terms of countries. Of course, not 100% coverage in terms of the journals in every country, because that's up to the country. They have to have an institution that has the capacity to collect the information. But you can see from this graph that from 1998, where we had 2,460 journal titles in our databases, we have now over 26,000. And this includes also historical records, because many journals are not active anymore. But we think it's valuable information to know that they existed and why they have left us. The smaller graph in the upper table refers to those journals that have made it into the catalog. The directory is a very broad, like an inventory of journals with basic information, ISSN type. In fact, we share information. And the catalog contains additional information only on those journals that meet a minimum of editorial quality criteria. These criteria were very carefully crafted in the early 2000s. They were adopted after much analysis about our own journals, about our own journal ecosystem, and also naturally taking into account the international standards. But this set of criteria very much represents what is good journal publishing in the region. And as a result, they are very stable, very robust, and the set of quality criteria have even been adopted by several countries for their assessments, evaluations, etc. This is what forms the catalog. In the lower graph, you have those orange bars that represent the online journals. And you can see that the number of online journals has been growing steadily. And it's interesting to see that one would think there are more than enough journals in the region, and yet more online journals are being created. And that has led us, after several years of observing the evolution of online journals around the world, to also establish very carefully crafted editorial quality criteria now for the online journals. And they were adopted a few months ago in our annual meeting, because this Latindex works as a network. And they are being, now we are starting to apply them, and we will have then a new version of the catalog just for online journals. So this has been a wonderful experience of over 20 years with a network that is a distributed network, where the sum total is much more than simply the sum of its parts. There has been a collective effort, and always if one country is in a bad situation, the others come and help out, and that always happens in the region. Even though we have strong commonalities, there are differences. There are strong differences, not only within the region, also within the countries. And that's something that has to be taken into account. And we have to, therefore, think how we can help the others so that the system grows as evenly as possible, despite those strong differences. With the initial success of Latindex, other information systems were created, regional information systems, offering additional services, which Latindex was not, had decided not to go into. So we have now Claxo, Cielo, Redalic. These provide access to full texts, which Latindex doesn't. It's not our purpose. But we have all helped these other systems and have accompanied them, and that's why we work together also with them. There is also a collaborative system between these various service providers. A few years ago, about 7 years ago, we decided also to create a portal of portals in Latindex, which harvests the full text documents from these regional portals. And as a result, we, in a very short time, could offer over 1.5 million articles free online. We haven't gone any further because this needs a bit of work, and we don't depend on external funding. It's always the whole of Latindex works on the basis of the people who are full-time employed by their institutions. We don't have extra people, and we don't want to rely on external funding. So that means that we don't always can evolve at the pace we want, but it's a safe way in our region to survive and to grow when there is a possibility to grow. It's interesting that, coming to the online journals and to open access, as I said, access to the literature has always been free, but there was no access. So the first challenge was to give access, and of course the internet was a wonderful solution for this. 90% of the journals, and this means really thousands and thousands of journals, provide free access with no subscription costs, with no need even to register. I mean, this is amazing if you compare with what happens in other parts of the world. Yet, only 21% have been classified by us as open access with capital letters, because in order to be classified, they have to declare themselves as open access, furthering, promoting the principles of the Budapest and Berlin and Bethesda, etc., etc. They have to say what kind of license regime they use, etc. Those which declare themselves as open access with capital letters are already 21%. And with the new quality criteria for online journals, we are trying to promote precisely the adherence to the open access movement. We think it is very important because we want to contribute not only in the region to open access, but to what happens to the rest of the world. Therefore, in particular, for the new criteria for the online journals include things like these new features: continuous generation of contents, statement of policies of access and reuse, as I said, interoperability protocols, uniform use of resource identifiers, and digital preservation. We have also been working with repositories and online libraries, not only with Cetto and Redalic, but there are of the order of 30 broad, quite big repositories, online journal repositories that are sources for harvesting articles from the journals. And these are part of the group of repositories we use for the portal of portals of Latindex. And that has meant that we are doing the same now with the portals, with these portals, as we have done for many years with the journals. Namely, we promote the adoption of good editorial practices. This has helped a lot the journals to improve, if not their contents, because that is not in our hands, that is more difficult. We need good science to be able to publish it. No? And this is something that the editors, they can select. Of course, they have peer review, etc. But first you need the raw material. And that's another matter. But what we have done with the journalists in order for them to improve their editorial quality, adopting norms, etc., we are doing now also with the portals, with the repositories, so that they become interoperable and we can harvest material from them. I think what has happened in the last 20 years in Latin America is really a big step forward. The scene today has very little to do with the scene 20, 25 years ago. And we are also in a good situation, we think, to move forward towards not just more open access, but also open science. These are examples of other steps that have been taken in the region which justify what I just said. You have a Salvador de Bahia declaration that normally is not mentioned, but it is also a declaration in favor of open access. This was promoted by Cetto in 2005. We have a number of open access legislations, national legislations, and in fact these legislations mandate a central authority in each of these countries to set up a national repository. That is why I was interested in understanding how your repository works, because now this is something that has to be done at least in Peru, Argentina, and Mexico. We have a number of institutional open access mandates. We collaborate, of course, with ISSN. This is understood. We also collaborate with PKP, Public Knowledge Project, and in fact the Latin American journals are the main users of the Open Journal System, which is a system that helps journal editors to do the whole management of the editorial process. And that is, of course, open source and freely available and very useful. We cooperate with the OAG, with the OAR, etc. we do a lot of work with the editors, with the journal editors. And we train them continuously online and also in courses. We give advice. We are all the time busy giving advice to, especially to editors and to librarians also. And we have been developing impact indicators and that go beyond the indicators that are promoted and established by the commercial publishers, and that unfortunately have been adopted, as was said this morning, by our government authorities and institutions. This is one of the contradictions that we share with the countries in Europe and in the USA. And the same contradictions that were mentioned in the morning, we have inherited them from you. And it is very difficult to change that. So not everything that comes from the North is good. And we hope that with our efforts to change these or to contribute to other impact indicators, we can have some influence in other parts of the world. Because, as I said, they are robust. And this was another step not long ago. Latindex, Redali, Claxo, and IVICT, the Brazilian Institute for Scientific and Technological Information, issued a declaration in favor of an open access ecosystem. And I would invite you to read it. It's long, it's a full page, but I find that the explanations, the justifications to issue this declaration are very strong. And when you read them, they allow you to understand our situation, which I think, of course, is not an ideal situation, but we speak with one voice, even considering the diversity, and we try to work together, complementing each other, so that we can all together move forward. We are in favor of course, free usage, preventing commercialization, and this is essentially what it says at the end. But I think that the rest of the text is worth reading. Now, can we move towards open data? I mentioned these three legislations. Peru and Argentina have already enacted the laws, and they have moved by creating a national system of repositories in Argentina and a national digital repository in Peru. In Mexico, things have been slower. The decree was decided upon by the Senate in 2014, mandating the creation of a national repository, but this is like a centralized system, and centralized systems are not so easy to move forward. How do you create a national repository if you don't have the basis for it? In Latindex, we started with the small databases that were already there, and that formed the basis. To have a national repository, you have to have somehow a mechanism to create the local institutional repositories that will contribute to a distributed system on nationwide. I think that's the only way. And I can understand that a national repository just like that by decree cannot move if the people are not there. And I must say that when we were working towards this decree in 2014, the strongest adversaries that were really opposing an open access legislation were our colleagues, the scientists. There was ignorance, there was confusion, there is a lot of inertia. They are afraid of giving away what they have already given away to Springer and to Elsevier and to other publishers, and yet somehow they are afraid of giving it away now when they don't own it anymore. So there is a lot of work to be done, at least among us, with scientists in order to that they get convinced that it is useful for them, that it is beneficial for their, what did you say, their status, their ego, their image. And I'm not the only one who has realized that with my colleagues, but I had a very nice talk recently with Peter Suber, who said that's the way we are working also at Harvard. And we are getting there because now the scientists understand that it's beneficial for them because they get more cited, etc. So I think there is a lot of work to do in order to really change the atmosphere and the way of thinking of the scientists and move voluntarily, which is the best way to move always, towards an open science and an open data system. Mandates help, of course, but it is not enough. We need to also think of the individuals and what is in their minds. In Brazil, also, this is another nice example, this Rede Cariñana, which is a network of digital preservation services, already available to 5 Brazilian universities. So this is a kind of intermediate step that we think is very useful to finally end up with a national repository, like a distributed system, which has to be not only created but maintained, and that is more easily said than done, especially when there is such scarcity of resources. So there are a number of challenges, and we better be realistic. I mentioned the scarcity of public funds, which is always a problem in our countries. I guess we are not the exception. We have a strong pressure from commercial publishers, the ones that have been mentioned here, and because they are the owners of the literature that is used by scientists, because that's what is being evaluated. That's the only thing that counts, because we live in this contradiction. Our national research councils only count the publications that are in Web of Science and Scopus. So don't ask me why then they finance our journals. No, but that's the reality. And unfortunately, young people are not more open to using the open resources. On the contrary. And there are studies about it. Maybe you have seen even a study that was published recently in Nature. And the reason, of course, is that they are even more under pressure than the older people, because they have to get their tenure, or they don't want to lose their job, etc. So the change doesn't seem to come from the younger scientists, which is a pity. This is something very particular from most of our countries, no long-term national policies. In the best of cases, the national policies are adopted by one government and changed by the next one, which means 4 years or 6 years, depending on the terms of the government. Non-enforcement, there are very nice laws and mandates and declarations. The declarations are always very nice, but they are not enforced. They don't lead to anything practical. We have weak institutional policies, the inertia that I already mentioned, this confusion I already mentioned, and this contorted and distorted quality impact criteria that do not reflect what is really of quality and of the impact we would like to have from our own research work. Where do we want to have impact? Whom do we want to impact? Of course, not just our peers. That's the most easy. Then I can use arXiv. I love arXiv. And my colleagues read my papers in arXiv, if that's what I want. And it's a wonderful thing. Even though I remember in 1996, when we invited Paul Ginsberg to the UNESCO conference on electronic publishing in science here in UNESCO, my colleagues, the physicists, were very reluctant to accept Paul Ginsberg's system. They were the most reluctant ones, and yet we all use it now, and we cite it. And we use it to read, and we use it to publish. So that's a good communication system among peers and between peers. But we need to also think of other users. And there is a whole universe of users that has been barely mentioned here. It was mentioned at the end of the morning session, namely the rest of the society. Of course, I am not pretending that they read and understand our specialized papers that we published in research journals. But there are a lot of journals that are produced for the wider public. Popularization journals, technical journals, for teachers, for people who are not the specialists in that discipline, in that field. Those journals are also important, and who takes care of them? Who evaluates them? Who cares for them? In that index, the numbers I gave you include those journals when they are good quality, when they meet editorial standards. And we have pushed for these journals also to be taken into account by the National Research Council. Finally, they have agreed to. They still don't know how to assess them, because Latindex is not an assessment system, it's an information system. We inform you about the quality criteria, the editorial quality criteria, but we don't rank the journals. But of course, the National Research Council and the other evaluators, they rank, and they don't know how to assess such a journal. They only know they have this scheme, what is a research journal, and they apply the same scale to all kinds of journals. But what about the rest of the society? We are supposed to not only work for our peers. So I think there is a divide. I think when we talk about who finances our work and whom do we owe our work and who should also benefit from it, there is also a contradiction, and we don't take into account that there are other potential users that would benefit a lot from all these journals. Of course, not from the very specialized, but that's why we have to have a whole diversity of journals and of journal levels. So we also have problems of poor connectivity still in some of the countries, and in some of the areas within the countries. Only the major urban areas in the countries are the ones that are more or less connected, but sometimes not even those. So I would like to end with a proposal. So we have the Golden Road, which is the equivalent of paid open access. Somebody said, well, it doesn't have to be paid. In practice, it is. In practice, we have to pay. If we don't pay, then our papers are not read, unless we upload them in archive. And then they are read, in the case of physics, but in archive doesn't exist everywhere. Then there exists the Green Road, which is basically the equivalent of self-archiving, which is what I would call an individual solution. But individual solutions, I mean, they depend too much on not only on our will to, and our readiness to do the job, but also on the time. We already have to do a lot. We have, in addition to doing the research, the scientists have to write their papers, have to process them, have to see that they get published. Even books, we have to give them camera ready for free, no? And then still we have to act as referees also. That takes also some of our time. Everything for free. And then we have to pay for our papers to be read. That's the situation. But if we go the Green Road, we also have to deposit them, because our institutions don't have necessary the means and the people to do the deposit. So this self-archiving, it sounds nice, but I don't think it is very realistic. And I think there are others in the room who have said something similar. So that's why I would like to think rather, at least from my perspective, from the Latin American perspective, of a third road. But this is not the third road as it is understood in politics. Because in politics, the third road is something in between. I don't like things in between. The third road is a different solution, which I think in a way is going back, bringing back the scholarly publishing way to where it belongs. And this is how it works in the countries of the region. More than 90% of the publishers, of the editors of our journals are scholarly publishers, either universities, public research institutions, or societies, scientific societies. So why should we give that away to a company? Why not continue, make this system grow, that they have the capacity also to take the next step and to do really go into the level of the platforms, to the road of open science without having to rely on commercial companies, enterprises, when we have the capacity to do it. And I have been witness in the last couple of years in the case of the National University of Mexico, which of course is one of the strong universities. I have seen that this is possible. It is possible when there is a will, when there is a decision. Yes, we can make it. Yes, we can. We have been publishing, we have been editing the journals. We are the owners of these journals. We can take the next step and have journal platforms. We already have a journal platform for 180 journals, all using OJS. We can take the next step. We don't have to rely on somebody else. We have the people, we have the capacity. And I think if we are confident in our own capacities, then we can also do it together. In the region, there is no other way but open access. And since we have moved from open access in, small letters to open access capital letters, I think we are moving in the right direction. Of course, we will have to continue to resist the pressure from external commercial companies. Of the systems that I have mentioned, some have resisted better than others, I must say. Even at the level of journals, some of the journals have been already captured by Elsevier, but well, I mean, I would say this is a minor loss. And it is a minor loss that we can still work with because we do have an alternative. But if we hadn't done all this work in these 20 years, we would have no alternative. And we would have simply to follow what the North is doing. No, we want to contribute to it, but with something that is really towards the good for everybody. So at least I think in Latin America we do have the conditions and the historical background to go a different way and not to fall into the hands or the claws of the predators, because those are the predators, the commercial publishers. We don't have a problem with journals, predator journals in the region. We don't, because that's, which are the predator journals? The ones that want to make business. But since journal editing is not a business in our region, we don't have predators. So that's all that I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cetto. I believe we have time for a few questions, and then we will move to the reception. So, does anyone have any? Didier?
Thanks a lot for your talk, and especially the conclusion that I think everybody appreciated. It's a comment about 33 years ago, there was a delegation from the South which went to Philadelphia to meet with ISI and to say, we want that our journals would be represented into the Web of Science. And Michael Moravchik talked about it, and the idea was really like, we have all these journals, and of course they are not visible, and the Web of Science is the only tool that is visible. And what is really interesting is that you're showing us how 3 decades of work outside of these Western, whatever elitist tools and companies have come into these different things. And I think that's really striking for me, considering your conclusion, and thinking what would have been the road whether ISI would have accepted the small limited numbers of journals, building a kind of academic elite around it into these countries like they did in the North. So thanks a lot.
More questions?
And I want to add my thanks to Didier's remarks. I think this was a splendid concluding talk today. But I particularly want to underscore the importance of what you said at the very end. Revive the societies, the universities, the research centers. Make the alliances between the libraries and the university presses work so that these sites can become producers again of documents that will help the research everywhere. And will help in every country to have platforms of publishing where people can really raise the issues that are of relevance to them or to their country or to their region, and not have to try and find the problems which are supposed to attract the greatest number of citations in order to be accepted in commercial journals. There is a distortion there that you've well underscored, and I think you've given the solution. We've got to go back to 1955, essentially, before Maxwell became, let's say, very, very dangerous. Go back to a system in which we can have the scientists publish their own voice and discuss the way they want to communicate with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. If you allow me still.
Oh, sure.
Yes, thank you. Well, there are voices also in other places, and I'm very positive and optimistic about it. But let's not let these voices fade, because also in the US mainly, and perhaps a bit less in Europe, scholars, academics have realized that universities have lost a lot, and this is it was evident. It became evident during the serious pricing crisis, but this has not improved, I think. So I really think we should move that way, and if we can work together, that's even better. I had meant to mention something that for us was very important in the early 90s, which was the existence of many other indexing and abstracting services. And there was a huge amount of them. There were lists and lists and lists, everything on paper first, no? And then online. But you had zoological abstracts and physics abstracts and biological abstracts, and they really gave a very good service. And we used them. No? And we said, okay, our journals are not in ISI, not in SCI, but they are in zoological abstract. And that's important. because then people who are interested in that field, in that area, they know where to look for them. And that has also disappeared. Now with the repositories, we can come back. I don't like saying simply, let's go back to 1950s, because, I mean, many things have happened then, since then, no? But I understand you. Yes, no. Moving forward, but of course, recovering what we have lost and what is so valuable from those times. And that we have to do, and we should work together.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cetto. That's a wonderful way to end our conference today. And I just want to take a minute again to have a round of applause for all of our speakers. It was such a wonderful program. And I also want to thank Dr. Biquet for pulling this program together, and also the staff of the ISSN International Center who've worked so hard to make this happen. We've all benefited from their hard work, and I know we've all learned a lot, and we've had a wonderful experience to share ideas together today. So with that, I think we can move on to the reception. As I said, the cocktails are waiting, so I